Good afternoon. We're here today with Judge William J. MANFREDI of the Court of Common Pleas of the 1st Judicial District of Pennsylvania. Good afternoon, Judge.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for coming here and participating.
As I think I mentioned before, one of the reasons for coming is to be sitting here and discussing what has gone on in the last 30, 40 years in this court.
Well, thank you.
I mean, you told me you've been here 40 years, I've been here
Yes.
30. So I guess the things, if we were to discuss some of the things that happened over that period of time, you would be as familiar with them as anybody.
I hope to be, yeah, but I'm sure I'll learn something from you today.
Let's hope.
Now, if we start at the beginning, then, Judge, can you start by telling us about your early life?
Native Philadelphian. Grew up in the Overbrook section of the city, went to grade school, moved out to Delaware County where I went to high school. After high school, came back downtown, went to the University of Pennsylvania for 4 years undergraduate and 3 years of law school.
Yeah.
After that time, I practiced law for some period of time.
Yeah.
And I guess it was about 12 years I was practicing law after I got out of law school and did some other things. Actually, between law school and the start of the practice, I spent a lot of time traveling around Europe.
Did you?
Because it was something I always wanted to do.
You and me both.
In fact, in the early part of my career, I would try to tack my vacations together so I could get more time over there. I really used to look forward to going to Europe every year, whether it was the first time I went, I did trains with a Europass. The second
right.
time I went, I really was hot to try to run a motorcycle around Europe, and I did that all over. Yeah, I went over and during a good exchange rate period, I bought a BMW motorcycle in Denmark.
No kidding, yeah.
And traveled through most of Europe with it.
That's great.
But when I got serious about the practice of law and had been to Europe probably 5 or 6 times, 6 years in a row, I came back and I had a general practice here in the city, right up until 1983 when I was first appointed to the bench by Governor Dick Thornburgh.
Oh, right.
Amazingly, I was at a educational program done by the Brookings Institute down in Washington, and I think Thornburgh was down there. I don't know what his connection was. He's not the Attorney General any longer, but I think he was affiliated with one of the corporations. I went up to him and I said, Governor, I just want you to know that you appointed me back in 1983. And what he said to me is, and I hope you behaved during this incident. But they remember.
Yeah.
They remember. And,
how about it?
If you forget, they'll make you remember.
Well, there you go. I mean, you always wonder whether your old sponsors actually do remember that, you got where you got partially because of their help, and whether, you're just a man or a face in the crowd, but they do remember you individually.
Well, it was interesting because of some arrangements and the fact that I had actually won a primary in the spring of 1983.
Okay.
I was appointed, although I was a lifelong Democrat and a registered Democrat, and probably running as a Democrat in the election, I was appointed by a Republican governor.
Right.
So I've always found that very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I'm kind of proud of that.
Well, sure, why not?
And as we sit here right now, and it was interesting, I am the senior most judge by length of service on the Court of Common Pleas.
Well, congratulations.
Yes. In commission.
Right.
Which was kind of interesting. They have so many difficult little niceties in terms of what judges do or do not do around here. And we have a president-judges election coming up in November.
Right.
And traditionally, it's the senior most judge that supervises that election of the president judge. Well, I thought that was me until we read the rule, the administrative rule, more closely, and it's the senior most judge under the age of 70. And since I was 70 about 3 weeks ago,
no.
I lost my authority to be the main supervisor of the president judge's election. But I go back a long time, 1983. I was not yet 40 years old at the time it happened.
That is young for a judge, yeah.
We had pictures taken at the time where my hair was a lot darker than it is now. And to the extent my secretary, when requested for a photo, mistakenly would send a picture taken of me back then, and I think Backrack took some pictures of all of us back around in '85.
Yeah.
I get comments from some of my fellow judges, especially the women judges, that what did you do? Send in your high school graduation picture? So we had to be more careful when people requested pictures now.
Well, sure.
I have a portrait has been commissioned and done, and I think that portrait will more accurately represent what I look like at this period of time.
Yeah.
So this is probably the good time.
Yes.
I mean, some judges get their portraits done maybe 20 years from now. Maybe that's not what I would
No.
like to be remembered as, but right now, at this point in my life, I think it's time, that I would like to be remembered.
Sure, and an oil portrait is just a beautiful thing when when you see them, and you understand that it's a very painstaking process to paint and to sit for them, as a matter of fact. So,
Well, it's a part of the tradition, since we're in this courthouse. And going back to 1983 when I came in, one of the most exciting things to me
yeah,
was now because I was a judge, having the run of the building.
yes,
And which meant that you could walk around, find all the hidden little alcoves, whether on the 9th floor of City Hall
and they are
or in the
there.
catacombs, but you were free to go anywhere and look at anything you wanted. Also, you could sit down with people that you had only known from a distance,
Uh-huh.
like judges who had been on the bench for many years, even before you ever thought about it.
Yeah,
Judges who probably were on the bench even when you were in law school. I remember one of the most interesting conversations I had, because oftentimes I would get done my trial responsibilities earlier in the day.
right,
And rather than rush home as people do after they've been on a job for a long time,
yeah,
I would start to prowl the building to find out if there was somebody interesting to talk to or something interesting to look at.
well, that's great.
And I would see old timers like Harry Takeif and
Right.
Ray Kramer, and probably one of the most interesting conversations I used to have, and he invited me back a number of times, was Charles Klein. Judge Charles
Uh-huh.
Klein,
Uh-huh.
who was well known as the head of the Orphans Court in Philadelphia for the longest period of time. And he would talk to me, and I didn't realize he had been a judge since 1938.
Yeah,
He was a judge around the time Roosevelt was president. So I would sit with him for a long period of time, and he would tell me about the history of the court from 1938 on, the relationship of this court to the federal district courts.
wow, from the horse's mouth, yeah,
How this court had been, for many years, right up until the late 50s, a much more significant court
uh-huh.
in terms of jurisdiction and the cases that were heard here than even the federal district court.
No kidding.
Federal district court seemed to have obtained more significance into the 60s,
Yeah.
and not before that. But that was the fun I had.
No, I mean, that's interesting. You're learning every day.
I still kind of do it, but I think
Yeah.
everybody else looks around now. And if talking about the portrait, one of the things that you see here, that you'll see pictures on the walls of these courtrooms of judges that served for the last 200 years.
Yeah.
Clark Hare, who is one of the portraits that hangs in the courtroom I've used most frequently during
Yeah.
my career, was the president judge of this court, I think, in 1810. So
Wow.
it's great, if you do get a
Yes.
portrait done, it's great to have your portrait hanging
Right.
next to people that have been here 200 years, and the tradition of this court is visible anywhere you go.
Yeah.
When my jury panels come in and I talk to them, I always try to talk to them about how lucky I feel,
Yes.
and that I hope they feel as well, to
Uh-huh.
be operating in a courtroom that has been used in that form for over 100 years.
I remember the old photos that I found of your courtroom in particular. It's a beautiful room.
And it's been in continuous use since around 1900.
Uh-huh.
We know the building started construction around 1875, took about 25 years
Right.
to
Okay.
complete, and then we were in here, and we had jury trials going on here in 1900.
Yeah.
And I also told him to look around at that courtroom, because if you're ever called to another room in this building, it'll look nothing like this one. If you go to
Yes,
the
they all are individual, yeah.
Criminal Justice Center, all the courtrooms are
Well,
the same,
Yeah, right.
because that's of recent construction. But
Yeah.
City Hall, every courtroom is different.
Yeah.
The details are different, and it's wonderful just to look at the time that was spent in this building.
You're right.
But I'm sure you don't want an architectural.
Well, it's fine with me. But, this is the sort of information I am interested in. in that, you know, you bring it to light, and I think that's great. That's your own experience.
Well, it was important to me as a young judge, and as I said, I was under 40 when I came on here. One of the things that all Philadelphians were loved to participate in or to be spectators at was the Mummers Parade.
Right, sure.
And the finish line of the Mummers Parade used to be in the northeast corner
Okay.
of City Hall. So I was very anxious to get a chambers in City Hall, especially in the northeast corner, so that on New Year's Day I could bring people into my office and we could have cocktails and watch the finish going on right below us.
Right.
And it's, that definitely was a consideration for
And they
me.
used to reserve the best shows for that particular point.
And I would manage to get a chambers in City Hall probably after 2 years,
Yeah,
even in the face of seniority.
isn't that great, though?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've been here ever since, and one of the things I'm going to have to confront when I face my retirement coming up in a couple months is because senior judges or those that work have to clear out their offices.
Right.
So this has been like home for me for quite a long time, and I have accumulated quite a bit of tchotchke in my chambers. And I don't know if I'm going to have a garage sale outside in the hall.
Okay, well, let me know.
Or I'm going to have to rent a storage space somewhere to put some of these things.
Okay, that's great.
But you can accumulate a lot in 30 years.
I'll bet. Hey, talking about that, how do you think, or if there is a change, how do you think the practice of law has changed from when you first began practicing to the current day, the present?
Well, the obvious difference, it's not so much in the practices. The volume of cases has increased tremendously, evidenced by the volume of cases has, of course, bred a large increase in the number of judges in this court and many other courts.
Yeah.
I don't know how many judges were here when I was here, but I would imagine not more than 60 or 70. Now we have over 100.
Right, okay.
And that's a reaction to the increase in inventories, both criminal, civil, orphans, and other places like that.
Does that change the practice also? Or?
Well,
I know
more cases, more
changes the
lawyers.
management. Oh, right, yeah.
More cases, more lawyers. When I was practicing law, there were firms that had 15, 20 lawyers at the time that now have 150 lawyers.
Right.
I mean, I've noticed that that has happened. And they hire more people to handle a greater inventory. I know most people want to say, oh, well, what has changed in the court more than anything else is a reduction in civility between the parties in the cases.
That's come up.
I myself haven't witnessed too much of that
Okay.
because I always try to keep a firm hand, I won't say a heavy hand,
right.
a firm hand on what's going on in my courtroom.
Uh-huh.
And I think people recognize that I, for one, am not going to tolerate any incivility in the courtroom, that there are responsibilities that lawyers have, and one of those is to comport themselves in a proper manner when in a courtroom.
Okay. And so that, the effect is also the same for the courtroom, rather than the whole practice of law, but also the courtroom, if it's run properly by a judge such as yourself, then the volume or other factors haven't changed appreciably. How about for your own courtroom over the years? I imagine you're managing it pretty much the same now as you were when you began 30 years ago.
Well, I've had a lot of different uses for my courtroom. Obviously, in this court, it's so large that you have different assignments depending upon where you've been and how long you've been on the bench. And I started off on the criminal side of the court. And I was on the criminal side of the court for a good 10 or 11 years. First 10 or 11 years, I had some positions on that side of the court that gave me a very good sight line as to what was going on. I mean, I was up the major trial calendar judge, assigning most of the major criminal cases in the court to a whole series of judges, and I was the homicide calendar judge for quite some time as well. I haven't seen a lot of changes on the criminal side in terms of when a city gets larger. I think the volume of cases in that particular area is going to be larger, but I think the court has done the best we have been able to do to deal with larger numbers of arrests and larger numbers of cases.
Mm-hmm.
From what I see now, it seems that this court in particular is making very productive strides in handling the larger inventories on the criminal side of the court, and I am very pleased to see what is happening in that respect.
It does seem like a lot of good changes that are happening.
But that's a long time ago for me. I was 10 years, but I have been on the civil side of the court for 20 years.
Okay.
Had many different positions, and probably the civil side of the court is one of the most interesting projects that has been going on here, I think either statewide, nationwide, or anywhere, and that is because many, many years ago, the civil side of the court was like a sister of the criminal side that got very few resources, that very few people were interested in whether the cases got resolved or not. The manner of managing was more haphazard than organized. Consequently, when I came to the civil side of the court, we were confronted with a system that had over 28,000 major civil cases backlogged.
There was a heck of a backlog.
And probably a period of time from filing to resolution of those cases is anywhere from 5 to 7 years, if you were lucky.
Yeah.
I think we were fortunate around that time that a bunch of smart people were involved with administration in the court and also in leadership of the judicial part of the court. And we saw that some things could be done to change it. The American Bar Association, which long had been a voice crying in the wilderness about how long it should take for major civil cases to be resolved, had often said it shouldn't take more than 12 or 24 months to resolve one of these cases, but nobody had really ever done anything to accomplish this.
Compared to the 7 years that were actually
Absolutely.
the fact, yeah.
But we did it. We had some good people here. We took an interest, and the first thing we took an interest in is finding that judges should do something they had never done before on the civil side of the court, and that is to manage the cases, to control the pace of litigation, which had always been the intellectuals, the academics in case management had always talked about this, but nobody had really taken the time to do it.
Yeah.
But we actually started and did some of this. And we had seminars, we had meetings, we had one of the things that really worked well for us is none of this would have happened very easily without the bar itself opting in and being interested in doing it. And the bar was very enthusiastic about it. You know, we encouraged them, we worked with them, and we were able, with the cooperation of one of the very well-known think tanks, case management think tanks in the United States, the National Center for State Courts, to come up with some methods which we applied to the standards of the American Bar Association.
Day forward and day backward.
And day backward, it took us 8 to 9 years to work through a day backward program, and we went into day forward. And what has happened since is history. This court has been motoring along and handling our inventories ever since then. And I guess the one thing I'm very happy to talk about is there was a period of time that I was the supervising judge of the civil side of the court.
Right.
We brought the National Center in again to kind of audit, you know, to give us like an upgrade in terms of what we were doing. Was it the right thing or the wrong thing? And they came in and they audited us and reviewed us, issued a report. And the most interesting part of the report that all of us liked is they described us as arguably the best urban civil trial court in the United States.
In the country, yeah, I remember that. And from the National Center for State Courts, that's a tremendous compliment. You did away with the entire backlog, am I right?
There is, we have inventory, we do not have backlog.
Right. You mentioned 28,000 cases waiting, but they've been disposed.
Oh, it's cut down. We probably, in major civil cases, have usually somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 major civil cases filed every year. We're managing to stay current.
Right.
And
which is
we handle everything, manage everything on a yearly basis.
Yeah.
We have a leader, a judicial leader assigned to that year, and we have judges assigned to that leader at whatever stage the cases are. And we manage that. So far it's worked well. The only disappointment I have about our case management is understanding that it works so well, and that it really, just with some persistence and perseverance, that it can work, that so few other courts in the United States have embraced it.
Yeah, I thought back when it happened that it would naturally be some kind of the first judicial district would, the civil, would become almost like a teaching or a court or something, an ideal to be, to strive for, you know, through the other court systems in the country. But it doesn't seem to have happened that way.
I don't know, these other courts seem to, I don't know if they're intimidated by the prospect,
Hmm.
or just want to do what traditionally has been done in court systems everywhere.
It might be easier
It's
to
just,
do
you know, let the lawyers control the pace of
that.
litigation.
Right, yeah.
Rather, and this is on the civil side of the court, maybe they're more interested in the criminal side of their courts, but I think this is one of the things that the citizens are entitled to. It's a
Mhm.
well-managed area of civil litigation. It's a dispute resolution system.
Yes, okay.
And, you know, we have an obligation to provide this system for taxpayers to have their disputes resolved. I mean, the thing that people don't understand, and we not only managed, we measured when we started doing this, and we were fortunate at the time to advance in terms of a lot of data processing advances and computer-generated record keeping and things of that nature. So what
Mhm.
we found, and since then we found that this is consistent almost anywhere in the country, that although we do a lot of trials here, trials are a very small percentage of the functioning
Right,
of the court.
sure.
I think nationally, I've been told, and it's certainly here, no more than 2.5% to 3% of any major civil case filed ever is resolved by a trial.
Trial.
Most of them resolve beforehand. Most of them resolve with agreement by the parties or other resolution of the case, but also
That's what you
before a
strive
trial.
for. Yeah,
So even though this happens most of the time, we still have quite a few trials here, probably more than some other jurisdictions, because what gets these cases done and gets them done in a reasonable period of time is not that they go to trial, but that a trial is available to them. And what we've done from the beginning in our programs is make sure that they have a guaranteed trial date, and they know what that trial date is early
okay,
on.
right. And in the meantime, you have specific dates that are kept and enforced for certain activities to happen along the way leading up to any possible trial or settlement.
That's right. You know, the whole system works, and you've heard me say this before because I've spoken to a number of CLE programs. Is
Mhm.
what we have here is we have significant events,
Right,
and we have deadlines. And the importance of the significant events and the deadlines is that lawyers prepare for these things.
yes,
And when lawyers prepare, they know something about their case and they become ready to work on their case. And often when they're prepared, they resolve their
right.
cases.
And that's the idea.
And that happens.
Yeah.
And probably the most important significant event is the trial date certain that we give all our civil cases very early on
Mhm.
in their life. And the system has worked.
Very,
But it works because, not just because the judges or administrators here have done a good job, it works because the lawyers have bought into it.
yeah,
And
Sure.
it plays well with the nature of their practices. And I've heard very few complaints from lawyers that practice in Philadelphia. In fact, in the mass tort area,
yeah,
Philadelphia has been a center for the filing of mass tort cases for years and years. Some people have suggested that the reason people bring them here is because they think they're going to get bigger verdicts or bigger settlements.
right,
My experience is that's not the case. People bring them here because they know their cases will be managed
yes,
and they will be put in a posture where they can be resolved. And that's our duty, to resolve disputes.
exactly,
Resolve disputes. I don't want to say that we're not a justice system, but you know, obviously we are a justice system in by many definitions of the
Right.
term. But I think that the guarantee of justice it's more often found when parties resolve the cases on their own.
exactly.
Everybody seems to be pleased with that kind of a resolution.
And they do. I've heard many lawyers compliment you and your colleagues on the civil system, on the civil side, and the jobs that you've been doing. I appreciate that, as a matter of fact, myself.
But that's one of the things I'm proud of, having been part of.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping
You
them
should
on.
be.
Yes.
Let me ask you another question that might seem like a left turn somewhere, but were there any individuals in your practice or your time as a judge, which of course it's most of your professional life, who stuck out to you, who you wanted to emulate, or who you thought of as a giant of the court or of the law, something like that?
I have, when I was sworn in, I was very excited, and I was very proud to be part of a court that had been around for so many years.
Right.
It would be hard for me to mention any one individual who was a particular hero of mine on the court, because there were so many people
Yeah.
that were influential in such a large court. I mean, I would say one of the people who has always, and he's retired some years now, has always been a model for me, and just in terms of his demeanor and his way of handling people, has always been Ed Bradley.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you've interviewed Ed as part of this program or not,
Scheduled.
but he is a person that ran this court for the first 15 years I was here.
Okay.
And
He was the president judge.
he was the president judge for that period of time, and he was excellent in terms of balancing everything that went on in this court, the employees, the judges, the bar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think and if you see him now, and he's still around, in fact, he recently came in to see me last week to say hello. And it always reminds me of, I don't know if we should say they're kinder and gentler times back then when Bradley was running, but he certainly was always a gentleman and always a person that was available to any of his judges to help, and one who, to me, was a model of how a judge should carry themselves, both in and outside the courtroom.
Great, great. Were there any particular cases in your experience, either, again, as a lawyer or as a judge?
Well, we were talking about something beforehand. I don't know about individual cases, but when you're doing trials, there were civil cases where, and I'll say this again at some other point where you may be around, where sitting as a judge may be the toughest white-collar job in the world. Because sometimes you have to combat boredom in terms of what's going on in the courtroom, but you got to be the one that's there and paying attention. So what I always look forward to was well-presented cases, and cases where there were interesting issues. And we have always had a fairly large inventory of medical negligence cases.
Yeah.
And I always enjoyed those cases, because as an individual, and we were talking about this before, I think, if you go to your family doctor, you get 10 minutes, right? And you're in and out before anything can happen, or you can find out anything. But as a judge sitting on the court, they would bring in the most distinguished practitioners in every specialty from throughout the country to testify for one side or another in a medical negligence case about the standard of care, about the treatment that was given to the particular plaintiff in that case. And oftentimes, that testimony could go on for hours. And at the end of that testimony, I would often feel I knew more about urology, neurology, orthopedics than some medical students did.
Yes, right.
It was really interesting, and
from a noted authority at the same time.
Absolutely, it wasn't your family doctor. It was somebody who was the dean of the medical school at some university in the Midwest, or a distinguished professor of a particular specialty at some medical school.
Yeah.
So it was, those were the good cases. But a lot of cases, a judge really has to work hard to stay with it and stay on top of it.
Well, I imagine. But you seem to be the type of guy who looks for knowledge or information. It seems as though you're very curious about things, and you want to find out new things and want to learn all the time.
It's true. One of the things I'm proud of in terms of my trial, or an experience a lawyer would have in trying in front of me, is I do not get involved in the presentation of the attorney's cases. And it's something, some judges have a different opinion about that. They feel that it is more important for them to try to get certain facts in front of the fact finder when they think that it's important to do that. I myself think that a trial is a trial. It's an adversarial proceeding, and I don't want to jump in.
It's a lawyer's job.
It's a lawyer's job to present their case, and I'm not one that's going to get involved to interfere with a lawyer's case or to put their case on for them.
Right.
And I think that's the way judges should operate in court.
I agree. It's reasonable, and they have a job to do, and so do you.
Sometimes it's difficult to stay out of it.
Yeah, well,
But you got to be true to your principles. True to your principles.
Yeah, you must bite your tongue fairly often.
I think the juries have the same feeling sometimes. In our jurisdiction, jurors can't ask questions.
Oh, right. Okay.
And you can see sometimes they want to jump up. And maybe that'll change after I'm off the court. But I think there are some jurisdictions that let the jurors ask questions. But that could be a very interesting proposition.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about while we have you here?
I don't know, is there any particular area you want me to, should I look at your list again and see what the topics were?
Well, you can, but it's pretty much anything you'd like to speak about. I think you've
I don't know, I guess the audience for this would be those that come after?
Yes, well, there's an idea.
Well,
How about advice?
What was it, the Shawshank Redemption?
Yeah.
Where if you looked at the
Oh, yeah.
you looked at the support in the ceiling after the one fellow then that said Brooks was here.
Right, was here, yeah.
Well, just remember, Manfredi was here.
Again, speaking with us today has been William J. Manfredi, Judge of the Court of Common Pleas of the First Judicial District of Pennsylvania. Thanks again, Judge.
My pleasure.